On the tranquil summer evening of August 6, 1985, as the sun dipped below the horizon in Essex, England, long shadows stretched across expansive farmlands. Amidst this picturesque scene stood White House Farm, epitomizing the serene beauty of the English countryside. But hidden beneath this idyllic charm, a tragedy was unfolding. That fateful night marked the beginning of a horrifying sequence of events. As dawn broke on August 7th, it revealed a crime so shocking that it continues to provoke debates nearly 40 years later. A family torn apart, its members ruthlessly murdered, sparking allegations of police mishandling. The central question endures: who was responsible for this appalling act? Before delving further, let us take a moment to remember June, Neville, Sheila, Daniel, and Nicholas, innocent victims whose lives were tragically cut short in this gruesome event. June and Neville Bamber, the farmhouse proprietors, had shared a long companionship, held in high esteem as devout Christians and pillars of the local community. While Neville was more sociable, June was the introverted half. Like any loving pair, June and Neville Bamber reached a point in their journey together when they yearned to hear the joyful pitter-patter of little feet. Regrettably, destiny showed its harsh side, revealing that biological children were not in their future. Resolute and undeterred, their hearts open to adoption, they welcomed two little cherubs, a boy and a girl, into their lives and christened them Jeremy and Sheila. This milestone led them to relocate to the picturesque farmhouse, a property that held sentimental value as it formerly belonged to June's father. Neville and June embraced parenthood wholeheartedly. They endeavored to shower their precious due with the finest gifts life could offer, among which was a high-quality education. Sheila and Jeremy both graced the corridors of private schools, yet it became apparent that their behavior was as contrasting as night and day. Sheila thrived in her learning environment, ultimately embarking on a path towards becoming a secretary. Jeremy, on the other hand, struggled with discipline, a peculiar trait that troubled his otherwise placid existence. On a particular date in August of 1985, at a certain time in the wee hours of the morning, Jeremy Bamber gets a phone call from his father, Neville. With Neville in a state of panic and shouting, he says, "Your sister has gone berserk. She's got a gun." In a suspenseful twist, the call terminates abruptly after merely a few moments. Without skipping a beat, Jeremy springs into action, contacting law enforcement. Particularly, though his choice isn't the conventional 999 emergency hotline, but the relaxed rhythm of the non-emergency number. Unfazed by this unconventional approach, the police march forward, directing Jeremy for a swift meetup outside the property. My father's phone from White House Farm, and he sounded really frightened," he says. "My sister's gone crazy, and she's got a gun." Jeremy and the police squad converge on the secluded farm, the clock striking around 5:00 a.m., and an uncanny thick darkness shrouds the entire estate. The police's next move puzzles one at first glance, yet it's surprisingly typical of British law enforcement traditions. Rather than stepping foot inside, they patiently hold their ground outside for what feels like an eternity, a full 2 hours to be exact. Amplifying their voices through a megaphone, they incessantly inquire if anyone is inside and urge them to come out. This arguably unusual tactic stems from the UK police's unique protocol. As they don't typically carry firearms, a report of a firearm at a crime scene requires them to wait for armed reinforcement. However, even after a prolonged wait, the only response is the eerie silence broken occasionally by a lone dog's bark echoing from the darkness of the farm. Outside, Jeremy discloses a noteworthy detail to the officers, remarking that there had been a bit of an argument during a family dinner. As he left the property, Jeremy dropped another piece of information. He had inadvertently left behind his Anschutz .22 caliber rifle on the property, and it was loaded. At precisely 7:54 a.m., the police braced themselves to penetrate the eerie quiet of the farmhouse. With measured, cautious steps and the luminous beam of their flashlights as their guides, they explored the property. They made a gruesome discovery in a downstairs room. Neville Bamber's lifeless body draped over a chair, the aftermath of a sinister bloodshed. 8 gunshot wounds marred his body, with 6 ominously targeting his face and obliterating his recognizable features. The officers continued their grim inspection, treading the silent upstairs of the house, with only the occasional creaking of the old farmhouse's floorboards breaking the silence. Each bedroom unveiled successive horror shows revealed under the harsh beam of the officers' flashlights. The lifeless bodies of June, Sheila, and the two young boys bore tragic evidence of gunshot wounds. Law enforcement arrived well after their lives were extinguished. June tragically suffered 7 bullet wounds. Sheila suffered 2, Daniel suffered 5, and poor Nicholas suffered 3 gunshot wounds. This onslaught on the family was far from typical, escalating well beyond a regular dispute. Someone who had spiraled far beyond the realm of reality discharged a chilling total of 25 rounds in this severe bloodbath, indicative of a frenetic assault. The relentless brutality of such an act indicates someone engrossed with a sole motive: the ruthless annihilation of the family. But the nagging mystery was, who was the architect of this horrific act? A revealing aspect was how, as children, Jeremy and Sheila treaded vastly different paths in their growing years. Jeremy's secluded nature made it difficult for him to blend in with peers, and often put him at odds with order and decorum. His role within the family tableau was that of a prankster, yet his jovial antics often overstepped boundaries, occasionally leaving his family dismayed. He found a perverse pleasure in stirring unease, including with his mother. For instance, he exploited June's phobia of rats to induce fear. Their 300-acre farmhouse was plentiful with rodents. Jeremy would often pocket baby rats, taking his apprehensive mother's hand and forcing it inside his pocket, not releasing it despite her panic. Ultimately, Neville and June arrived at their wits' end concerning their son's conduct. They agreed that a strong dose of discipline might curb his unruly behavior. Their earlier, gentler approaches failed miserably. They decided to send Jeremy to a boarding school known for its stern and demanding climate, a luxury few parents had the opportunity to provide for their children. Certainly not every parent would consider this option. Boarding schools come with a high price tag, but they also offer a top-tier education and structured routines, features that can provide a meaningful turnaround for aimless adolescents. Jeremy, unfortunately, found the boarding school experience unpalatable. Similar to his previous school journeys, he resumed his loner routine. Despite keeping mostly to himself, he managed to make a few friends and confide in them about his adoptive status. However, as children often do, their promise to keep his secret hit a snag, and Jeremy's adoption story spread rapidly across the school. This led him to acquire an insensitive nickname, the bastard, a term traditionally denoting children born outside of wedlock. From Jeremy's viewpoint, this period clearly signified a challenging phase. Being sent away from his homestead as an adopted child, Jeremy might have understandably felt neglected by his family. Despite the trials, Jeremy made it through his boarding school journey, disregarding any uncorroborated rumors. It can seem that the institution had a positive impact on him, as he graduated as a vastly more stable and sensible person. Making the significant move in 1982, Jeremy resolved to enroll in college. His parents, in their bid to facilitate his new path, presented him with gifts, and quaint cottage within proximity to the family abode and a car. This was reflective of his parents' earnest desire to prevent him from reverting to his wild, rebellious ways. Jeremy responded to these generous gestures by actively participating on the family farm and earning a stake in the family's burgeoning campsite business, which was carved out of their own expansive land. It's crucial to recall that both Neville and June held strong religious sentiments. However, June was notoriously more pious than Neville. In fact, her fervent dedication to faith often bordered on extremism. As stated by many, she harbored firm beliefs that those who didn't adhere to her religion were heathens, even if it meant counting her own children amongst them. June had become so consumed by the absence of Christian faith within her family that it led her down a distressing spiral into manic depression. She found herself subjected to mental health treatment on 2 separate occasions, which included electroconvulsive therapy. This treatment entails inducing a minor seizure by passing small electric currents through the brain, purportedly intended to reset the functions of the mind. While it may seem outdated, there is empirical support for its efficacy when other treatments. Sheila, blessed with an enchanting beauty, was ambitiously making strides to establish herself as a glamour model. This career path starkly contrasted with her mother's devout beliefs and consequently was not met with approval. In fact, June even went as far as labeling her daughter the devil's child on several occasions. However, it wasn't merely the modeling that flustered June. At the tender age of 17, Sheila found herself expecting a child, which was not within the conventions of her mother's strict Christian norms. To June, this incident was a steep stumble of embarrassment. Even though her beliefs strictly forbade abortion, she discreetly managed the situation, rendering Sheila childless again without the outside world catching a whisper. In 1977, Sheila eventually tied the knot with the man responsible for her out-of-wedlock pregnancy, Colin. They sought to expand their family and were blessed with twin boys, Daniel and Nicholas. Unfortunately, the marriage was not meant to last. Nearly months after welcoming their sons, Sheila discovered Colin's infidelity. He had been maintaining a relationship with another woman throughout their marriage. This bitter truth plunged Sheila into a sea of depression, and she began to grapple with mental health issues. Akin to her mother's strikingly, she even consulted the same psychiatrist at the same mental health facility as June. The psychiatrist ultimately diagnosed her with paranoid schizophrenia. In an eerie likeness to her mother, she began to exhibit similar attitudes, even to the extent of dubbing her own children as the devil's children. Sheila wasn't merely hinting at ending her own life, but also feared her sons were in the grip of demonic possession. In 1983, she managed her release from the hospital, but the reprieve was brief. Not long after, another stint in the hospital occurred, resulting in the children transitioning into their father's care. While all this was occurring, Jeremy somewhat comfortably navigated his way around working on the family farm and campsite. Lacking definitive ambition, he was, in essence, meandering through life. But one mustn't mistake his lackadaisical approach for stupidity. He might have been helping around the farm, but he also dabbled in an illicit side gig growing cannabis on the farm. Unfortunately, some of the blame indirectly lay with June, as any parent would attest. Forcing stringent belief systems on children or pushing them relentlessly usually culminates in rebellion. Jeremiah and Sheila's estrangement from June was arguably a classic example. Eventually, Sheila acquires joint custody of her children. On August 4, 1985, she visited her parents' home with her boys. A family dinner was organized on August 6, an event thoroughly attended. According to the family's housekeeper, everyone seemed to enjoy each other's company until a sour note was struck. June and Neville's ill-advised suggestion that Sheila would be better off putting her children into foster care noticeably ruffled feathers. Understandably, the inference of her inadequacy as a mother didn't sit well with Sheila. What began as a warm gathering swiftly dipped into a tense atmosphere. The evening wrapped up around 9:30 p.m., with Jeremy retreating to his cottage. The farm secretary called Neville around that time and was met with an unusually preoccupied tone. She discerned muffled arguments in the background, which led to a hurried end to their call. This behavior struck her as odd because Neville was usually composed and relaxed. However, a few hours later, devastating news struck. On August 7th, officers found Neville and everyone else in the house lifeless. Upon uncovering this horrific scene, the officers stepped outside the farmhouse to deliver the heart-wrenching news to Jeremy. His reaction was understandably overwhelming. He swung from inconsolable tears to eruptive anger, hitting anything within his reach in his grief-stricken rage. Based on their extensive dialogue with Jeremy regarding his family's intricacies, the police investigators theorized this was a cut-and-dry case. They surmised Sheila, burdened by her history of mental health issues, decided to exact a cruel act of vengeance on her parents by shooting them, murdering her own children, and subsequently committing suicide. However, this theory was laced with alarming inconsistencies. Sheila had been shot twice in the neck at varying heights, contradicting the idea of a single self-inflicted gunshot. Unfortunately, the police felt so sure of the causes and reasons for death that they did not pursue the investigation as rigorously as they could have. Wanting to spare Jeremy's feelings when he returned home, they burned the bedding full of the victim's blood in a striking disregard for procedure. A Sid detective handled the alleged murder weapon with his bare hands, potentially compromising important evidence. This instance occurred barely a few days after the grim discovery of the crime scene. Within 3 days, the police had tidied up the entire house and handed over the keys to Jeremy, the next of kin in the absence of any other surviving family members. The funeral of the deceased family followed shortly, drawing significant media attention. Jeremy's anguish was palpable during the service, matching his hysterical state during the discovery of his family. However, his behavior post-service cast a dubious shadow over the entire investigation. Exiting the church surrounded by his kin and friends, something unexpected captured the attention of a few perceptive mourners. Believing himself to be unobserved for a fleeting moment, Jeremy flashed a broad smile, an unmistakably merry expression that rendered his displayed agony only moments before. It was not a brave face put on for stoicism, but an ear-to-ear grin. A few attendees observed that his grief seemed to play the chameleon, waxing and waning in the presence of media cameras. Particularly during the condolences meeting, Jeremy uttered some bizarre comments like his newfound boss status and indicated his eagerness to retreat to his home to sleep with his girlfriend. Despite their prior procedural mishaps, the police made a crucial breakthrough. They tested the firearm for fingerprints, and notwithstanding the detective's bare-handed touch, only 2 distinct prints came to light, those of Sheila and Jeremy. This revelation didn't contradict Jeremy's earlier admission to ownership and his claim that he had left the loaded gun at the family home. Eventually, Jeremy's cousin came to stay with him. During a fumbling exploration of the house one day, he chanced upon potentially vital evidence concealed in the family office. He recklessly discarded a silencer in a cupboard recess. This piece of the puzzle didn't quite fit into the existing jigsaw. The .22 caliber rifle found at the scene was without a silencer. Although initially appearing inconsequential, this discovery posed a severe challenge to the standing assumption of Sheila as the perpetrator. The increase in the rifle's length due to the silencer prevented Sheila from self-inflicting her wounds given the resultant distance between the trigger and the aim. The police intriguingly found a petite spot of blood near the muzzle of the unearthed silencer. It seemed to indicate that the silencer had been on the gun, but they were unable to identify whose blood it was. Not only was his cousin betraying him, but Julie, Jeremy's girlfriend, expressed her doubts as well. On the eve of the killings, Jeremy had called her to let her know that something was seriously wrong, but he hung up the phone before she could say anything. Julie had been questioning Jeremy about what had really transpired, which had resulted in numerous disagreements between the two. At one point, the disagreements got so bad that Julie tried to smother Jeremy with a pillow. But when Julie found out that Jeremy had been having an affair behind her back, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. She went immediately to the police after beating him multiple times to express her worry that Jeremy might have killed his family. Of course, there was no hard evidence for her to show them. It was all based on evidence. For example, she said Jeremy once broke into the family campsite and stole money from them. Jeremy was quick to dismiss his past offenses, claiming he committed the theft to persuade his parents to invest in a more reliable security system. Julie also noticed that Jeremy frequently expressed discontent about his family. However, these events didn't peg him as a murderer. Julie did, however, share a few additional pieces of circumstantial evidence which spiked the interest of the authorities. She revealed that Neville and June had recently drafted a new will specifying an equal division of all family assets between Sheila and Jeremy. According to Julie, Jeremy harbored resentment at this arrangement as he yearned for the entire inheritance. Intriguingly, Julie recollected how Jeremy had earlier pondered over annihilating his family via gunshots, explaining to her how convenient it would be to pin the crime on his mentally unstable sister, Sheila. But the icing on this unsettling revelation was Julie's claim about a chilling interaction with Jeremy. Apparently, just after the gruesome discovery of the bodies at the farm, Jeremy had whispered into her ears, "I should have been an actor." Were they the bitter accusations of a scorned girlfriend seeking retaliation against her unfaithful partner, or an earnest pursuit for justice in the case of the Bamber family's horrific murders? Honestly, even the police grappled with this ambiguity. However, when Julie highlighted that Jeremy was shifting blame onto a plumber he had employed on the farm, they sprang to investigate further. the law enforcement quickly apprehended Jeremy and the bewildered plumber, who was clearly oblivious to the gruesome events as he clutched his watertight alibi. The police had to rule him out, focusing their investigations solely on Jeremy, who failed to establish an alibi. Yet Jeremy, now a wealthy heir, was able to secure bail. Surprisingly, in a negligent move, the police overlooked confiscating his passport. Jeremy seized this opportunity and hastily fled to Amsterdam, eluding justice once again. While on foreign soil, he kept himself afloat by trying to liquidate as many family assets as possible, from cars to brazenly attempting to sell explicit photos of his deceased sister to a tabloid. Constrained by his dwindling funds, Jeremy returned to the UK on September 29th and was promptly arrested. As Jeremy's trial commenced on October 3, 1986, the prosecution steered the narrative towards the multiple defensive marks found on Neville's body. It was evident that he put up a strong fight against his attacker. They argued that petite Sheila wouldn't have had the strength to overpower a burly man like Neville, whereas Jeremy definitely had brute force capacity. To debunk this, the defense channeled their argument towards Sheila's mental health history. They argued that Sheila's challenging mental health history could have led her to commit unthinkable acts, especially in a fit of rage. Despite the grim narrative, this argument was quite viable, as Sheila had previously expressed unsettling thoughts about her children being devil's children, and even claimed they were possessed, casting doubts over her mental stability. A crucial discovery by the forensic team further bolstered this arc. All the victims' blood had dried except for Sheila's, which was noticeably fresher. This evidence led the defense to theorize that Sheila might have been the last survivor on the property, possibly resorting to ending her own life only when she realized there was no escaping the police. However, the argument hit a snag. Investigators ascertained that Sheila could not have killed herself while the rifle was equipped with the silencer. If she had detached the silencer before committing the act, the police would certainly have heard the gunshot. But the clinching evidence was the finding of the silencer stealthily discarded in the back of a cupboard. If Sheila indeed shot herself twice, the likelihood of her mustering the strength or the will to hide the silencer is remarkably slim. The premise of any judicial proceeding is to adhere to innocent until proven guilty, with the burden of proof lying on the prosecution. While this case didn't conclusively prove Jeremy's guilt beyond doubt, the prosecution's arguments appeared far more convincing compared to the defense's brittle theory underpinned solely by Sheila's mental health history. The jury, swayed by these stronger arguments, found Jeremy Bamber guilty after merely 9 hours of contemplation. The court sentenced him to 5 separate life sentences, eliminating any possibility of parole. Nonetheless, this case hasn't reached its full closure. Both the defense and prosecution's lukewarm arguments have led to continuous speculation, even today. While some pin the crimes on Sheila, others remain convinced of Jeremy's guilt. In the midst of these varying opinions, Julie's credibility has often been questioned as people chalk her accusations up to a scorned woman's revenge. But despite Julie's possible motivations, 2 aspects remain unquestionable. First, Julie's testimonies to the police led to the arrests of Jeremy as well as the bewildered innocent plumber. Second, Julie's evidence was merely circumstantial and lacked concrete proof. She possessed no concrete proof to submit to the police. It is the testimony of a single person who had been in an intimate relationship with the accused and was injured by them, truly a trusted witness.